man. Not another day like last Tuesday.
Cause it's Taco Tuesday.
Tuesday.
The big news.
Welcome to Tuesday Newsday, where our learning goal is to determine two or more central ideas of a text and analyze their development over the course of that text, including how they interact and build on one another. At the end of today's article, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. A 4 means that you can identify the central idea or ideas. You can point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to look at how the ideas build on one another. That's above and beyond. A 3 is where we'd like all students to be by the end of the year. And if you can do that, that means that you are able to identify the central ideas. You're able to point to the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, but you're not really looking at how those ideas build on one another. If you're at a 2, that means that you can identify the central idea, but you're not able to identify the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, which is a lot like not showing your work in math. Not showing your work in math and just getting the answer doesn't tell your teacher, much in the same way that just identifying the central idea but not putting into the evidence doesn't tell me that you're getting the process. We need you to be able to prove that you can understand the process. I don't know if this is news to you or if you knew this all along, but school is not about getting the right answer. Never has been and never will be. The right answer is a byproduct of having good processing skills. If you can identify the process, if you can work through a problem, you have good problem solving skills, you've got good critical thinking skills, then the right answer comes as a result of that. So school is all about that process and identifying that evidence. So that's where you're at if you're at a 2. And a 1 means you are unsure of how to find the central idea of the text, which is okay. Please tell me if that's the case. That is quite helpful because it tells me what I can do differently as I'm working through the article, talking through it with you. That maybe I need to point out quotes. Maybe I need to talk about main idea building moves that the author makes. So know this. This 4-3-2-1 is a bit of an assessment of you, but it's just as much or more an assessment of me because it helps me understand how I can better teach this particular skill. To receive a unit and a half for today's lesson, you must highlight or underline the main idea, circle the evidence that the author uses to prove and support their point, and put a box around any other central ideas in the text. Throughout the video, you will be asked to identify the topic. Now, the topic is not the main idea. While some often think that the topic is the main idea, the topic just gives us an insight into what the main idea is. The main idea comes out in the details, and that will become clear in the story that we read today. You'll also be asked to summarize the story with an extra challenge. It's an extra unit if you complete this task. Summarize the story in 2 ways. The first is in exactly 12 words, and then the next is in exactly 32 words. A 12-word summary forces you to be really concise, to get right down to the point. A 32-word summary might allow you to add some of those details in. It's a way of thinking, again, some of that processing. The first and last sentence of the story serve to recap the story for the last sentence and introduce the main idea with the first sentence. So then you'll be asked to identify what you think the main idea of the article is. And finally, I will have 2 quotes available to you once we get to the end of the article, from the article, and I'll want you to answer, how does that quote support the main idea that you wrote up here? Why do you think the author chose to add that quote to their story to support their greater point? Alright, so here we are at the worksheet for Tuesday Newsday number 6. Identifying the topic. This is something you already did in the Ed Puzzle video at the beginning of the articles. The posthumous pardoning of Jack Johnson, a boxer in the early 1900s who was convicted of a violation of the Mann Act. We know this, we read those stories. So what I'd like you to do right now is move on to summarizing the story. Summarize the first story in 12 words now. Summarize the first story in 32 words now. Summarize the second article in 12 words now. Summarize the second article in 32 words now. The first and last sentence for each article are listed here. You already did this in the Ed Puzzle video as the article was on the screen, and so I'm not going to have you rewrite those, but boxer Jack Johnson, who was the first world heavyweight champion, has received a posthumous presidential pardon after years of bipartisan efforts by lawmakers and family members to clear his name, and a personal appeal from Sylvester Stallone to President Trump. And the last sentence is, that's wrong. The context of that came from Jack Johnson's great niece, if you remember from the article. The last thing you want to do is die and have your name tarnished, Haywood told the LA Times. That's wrong. In Article 2, the U.S. Department of Justice began investigating Jack Johnson for possible violations of the Mann Act from the moment the law went into effect in 1910. But prosecutors did not find an incident from which to build a case for over 2 years. So he was, like you read in the article, sort of wrongfully convicted. And the last sentence says, once again, Lucille was waiting for him. This was after he had turned himself in to the authorities coming across the border at Tijuana, Mexico, back in the United States, and taken to Leavenworth and after his release. Next up, if you were to summarize the main idea of the article, how would you summarize the main idea of the article? Please do so now. Quote from the first article says, I am taking this very righteous step I believe, to correct a wrong that occurred in our history and to honor a truly legendary boxing champion, Trump said. How does this quote support the main idea you presented? And a quote from Article 2, the U.S. Department of Justice began investigating Jack Johnson for possible violations of the Mann Act, almost from the moment the law went into effect in 1910. But prosecutors did not find an incident from which to build a case for over 2 years. On October 11, 1912, Mrs. F. Cameron Falconet came to Chicago accusing Johnson of kidnapping her daughter, Lucille Cameron. How does this quote support the main idea presented? Backtracking slightly here to the first quote. If you had something like this as your response to the quote, then you're on the right track. He was wrongfully convicted, and President Trump believed he was righting a wrong done to this man. Did you have this written? Was this your answer? How would you change what you wrote to align to what's written here? What would you add? What would you change? And next up, for the second quote, he ended up marrying her, and we know that after he spent time in jail, Lucille was there waiting for him. So she clearly wanted to be associated with him. So possibly Mrs. F. Cameron Falconet had motives that were racially biased and was unhappy that her daughter was with a black man. This is something that we've seen throughout history. Black men and women have been convicted of crimes based on the color of their skin. President Trump felt compelled to do what he could to rewrite history, as Johnson's niece said, and make things right. And finally, where would you rate your ability to determine the central idea of the text? Would you put yourself at a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1? And bonus question, why did you rate yourself the way that you did? What did you feel like you learned? What did you feel like you were able to do this article that you weren't able to do last article? A connection that you made that was able to, so that you felt like you were able to rate yourself as you did. Why do you think you rated yourself as you did?